I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. The first time it happened, I thought it was a coincidence. The second time, I wasn't so sure. The little coffee shop on Maple Street had become part of my routine long before she ever walked in. It wasn't a special place, just warm lights, quiet music, and the soft clatter of cups behind the counter. The kind of place people pass through without remembering faces. But I remember hers. It started on a Tuesday evening. I had been sitting by the window with my laptop open, pretending to work while actually rereading the same paragraph over and over again. Outside, the street lights had just flickered on, turning the glass into a faint mirror. That's when the door chimed. I glanced up for a second, just long enough to notice her. She wasn't trying to draw attention. Mid-40s maybe, confident but quiet. Dark hair pulled loosely over one shoulder. A long coat draped around her like she just stepped out of the cool evening air. She paused near the counter, scanning the menu like she'd been there 100 times and still couldn't decide. Then she smiled at the barista. Something about the smile made me look back at my screen too quickly, like I'd been caught staring. It should have ended there. But when my coffee ran out, I stood up and walked to the counter. As I waited, I noticed her standing beside me. Up close, she smelled faintly like vanilla and rain. "Long night?" she asked casually. I blinked, surprised she was talking to me. "Something like that," I said. She gave a small laugh, soft, almost private, like she wasn't laughing at the joke but at the quietness between us. "You always sit by the window," she said. That caught me off guard. "You noticed?" She shrugged slightly, folding the sleeve of her coat over her wrist. "Hard not to. You stare outside like you're waiting for something." I didn't know what to say to that, mostly because she wasn't wrong. My phone buzzed in my pocket then, but I ignored it. I already knew what it would be. Another message I wasn't ready to answer, or maybe one I wish someone would send but never did. Loneliness doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's just little habits, like opening your phone and closing it again, or typing half a message and deleting it, or sitting in the same coffee shop every night because it's easier than going home to silence. When my drink was ready, I picked it up and turned slightly. She was still there, stirring sugar into her cup. For a second, neither of us moved. Then her eyes flicked down to my hands. "You always fold a napkin like that?" she asked. I looked down. I hadn't even realized I was doing it, creasing the paper slowly between my fingers. "Nervous habit," I admitted. She smiled again, a little slower this time. "Well," she said, lifting her cup, "good night, Daniel." I froze. I had never told her my name, but she walked toward the door like it was the most normal thing in the world. The bell chimed softly as she stepped back into the night. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't focus on anything. The empty chair across from me suddenly felt noticeable. And just when I finally packed up to leave, my phone buzzed again. This time I looked. A new message from a number I didn't recognize. "You forgot your napkin tonight." A pause. Then another message appeared. "Same coffee shop tomorrow." I couldn't sleep that night. Not because of anything loud or urgent, just because her words kept replaying in my head, soft and deliberate, like they were meant for me even when I wasn't sure why. The next evening, I found myself back at the same window seat, pretending I'd come to work, but really waiting. She walked in like she owned the twilight. Coat open now, hair falling freely around her shoulders, carrying a book I didn't recognize. "Hi," she said, settling into the chair across from me. The barista brought her tea without a word. She'd memorized it by now. "Hi," I replied, trying not to let my voice shake. We sipped in silence for a few moments. I watched her hands cradle the warm cup, and my chest tightened for reasons I didn't want to analyze. "Do you always come here this late?" I asked, breaking the quiet. "Sometimes," she said. Her gaze flicked toward the window. "It reminds me of summers at my grandmother's house. We'd sit by the porch, just watching the streetlights come on. No one around, nothing urgent. Just time." I nodded slowly. "I get that. My mom's old apartment had the same quiet. I used to sit by the radiator and read for hours." Her eyes lifted to mine for a fraction of a second, and I felt like she could see more than just my face. She could see the half-empty part of me, the one I didn't show anyone. There was a pause, a careful one. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "It's strange. I didn't expect to meet someone here who reminds me of that." I swallowed. There were so many reasons this was risky. She was my friend's mom. Divorced. Older. Every scenario in my head screamed, don't, but the quiet thrill between us whispered otherwise. When her napkin fell to the floor, I bent down to pick it up. Our fingers brushed. I looked up quickly. She smiled, soft and knowing, and I felt my face warm in a way that had nothing to do with the tea. We talked about trivial things too, books, music, the city's new coffee blend, but the silence around those words felt heavier, more intimate than the conversation itself. Every glance lingered too long. Every laugh carried a hint of something forbidden, unspoken. At one point, she stood to check her bag. I offered to hold her tea while she fished through it. Her hand paused over mine, hovering. The cup wobbled slightly, and she laughed, a quiet sound, before placing it down herself. You're careful, she said softly, tilting her head. Or maybe just worried about spilling. I smiled, unsure what to say. My thoughts swirled. Should I lean closer? Should I pretend I didn't want to? Then, as she gathered her things, her fingers brushed mine again. Light, accidental, deliberate, I couldn't tell. And in that tiny gesture, 100 words passed between us. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I didn't know if I should have come back the next night. Part of me needed to, but another part whispered that this, us, wasn't supposed to be. Still, the coffee shop had this gravity I couldn't explain. She was already there when I walked in, seated in the same chair, the soft light catching the edges of her hair. She looked up briefly, smiled, but her eyes held something different tonight. Hesitation, maybe caution. Hey, I said, sliding into the seat opposite her. Hey, she replied, voice softer, quieter. The tea arrived, steam curling between us. I wanted to reach across the table, touch her hand, but I froze halfway. My fingers hovered above the wood, my heartbeat loud in my ears. She noticed, I think. She didn't move hers, just tilted her head slightly, watching me. We talked about the book she'd brought, about a small art exhibit in town. But the words were loose, light, covering the weight of what neither of us said. Every glance carried an edge. Every laugh felt like we were skirting a line we both knew existed. Then the door chimed. A familiar voice called out behind us. My friend, just casually walking past the window, waving to someone outside, oblivious to what was happening inside. My chest tightened. I froze mid-sip, the tea halfway to my lips. She didn't flinch outwardly, but I caught the small shift of her body, the slight way she leaned back, creating distance without moving. I wanted to reach for her again, wanted to close the gap, but something in her eyes held me back. Uncertainty, maybe a question. Do you know what you're doing? We fell into silence. Not awkward, but charged. My thoughts tumbled, messy. Why am I here? Should I leave? She shouldn't be here. A small thing happened then. She bent forward slightly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. My hand twitched. I leaned in just a little, but then stopped. Half a heartbeat too late, or maybe just in time. The chair scraped lightly as she shifted. Our knees almost touched under the table. I could feel the warmth radiating from her. My pulse spiked. I caught myself imagining her smile if I leaned in closer, imagining the brush of her lips against mine. But her hand moved subtly, touching the rim of her cup, breaking the moment. We sat there quiet, the tension like a held breath. The world outside the window moved, oblivious, while everything inside slowed to a crawl. I wanted to ask something, anything, but the words lodged in my throat. She looked up, eyes meeting mine, and for a fraction of a second, the hesitation melted away. Almost. Then the door chimed again. Footsteps. Someone else. Something else. And the moment, our moment, shattered. I wanted to say stay, but I didn't. Instead, I just watched her fold her napkin, slow, deliberate. And I realized I was holding my breath. I found her at the park after work, just sitting on the same old bench, tucked beneath the oak tree where the light fell in patches across the pavement. The city hummed around us, but here was quiet. She looked up as I approached, surprised, maybe even a little wary. You're here early, she said. I couldn't not come, I admitted. The words felt heavier than I expected. She tilted her head, studying me in that way that made me feel like she could read every thought I didn't want her to. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers entwined. I noticed how her ring caught the late afternoon light. Subtle, familiar, yet a reminder of lines neither of us should cross. We walked slowly along the path, silence stretching between sentences we never said. I wanted to reach for her hand, but the rational part of my brain, the part screaming don't, kept it in my pocket. You ever feel like everything you're supposed to do is wrong? I asked finally, voice low. She paused mid-step, looking at me, eyes soft but guarded. Sometimes, she said, but wrong and right aren't always simple. The words made my chest tighten. I imagined her with someone else, my friend, someone from her past. A flash of jealousy surged, brief but fierce, and I hated myself for it. We found a bench again, sitting side by side, but not touching. I felt her warmth, faintly fragrant, and I leaned just a fraction closer. My heart thudded. I can't stop thinking about you, I said before I could stop myself. The confession slipped out, fragile, raw, like a paper boat on a river. Her breath caught. She didn't answer immediately, just looked straight ahead, past me, eyes tracing the ripples of the pond. You shouldn't, she whispered finally. You know we shouldn't. I swallowed hard, wishing she'd reach for me, wishing she'd break the barrier that stood between us. Instead, she folded her hands in her lap, a small, deliberate motion. The guilt, the fear, the desire, they collided inside me. I imagined leaning forward, pressing my lips to hers, letting everything fall away, consequences be damned. My fingers twitched. She glanced at me then. Not a smile, not a frown, just a look, soft, hesitant, questioning. I wanted to ask her something, the question lodged in my throat, but the words wouldn't come. Do you feel it too? Can we do this? Should we? The wind shifted. A leaf fell, landing on her shoulder. She brushed it away. I swallowed. My chest ached. The bench felt too small for the space between us, too close and yet impossibly distant. Do you ever wonder what would happen if we didn't stop? My voice barely above a whisper, as though saying it louder might shatter the fragile calm. She didn't answer. She just looked at me, her eyes wide and uncertain, lips parted slightly, caught between something she wanted and something she knew she couldn't have. And in that quiet, suspended moment, I realized everything was about to change. But before anything could happen, before the first step toward the line we both knew existed, I froze. Because once it crossed, there would be no going back. I didn't see her for a week. 7 days where the coffee shop felt too bright, too loud, and the streetlights outside the window seemed like someone else's memory. My phone stayed silent. I told myself she was busy, tired, something normal. But a part of me, stubborn, foolish, knew it wasn't just that. When I finally went back, the bench we always occupied was empty. The chair across from mine sat vacant, sunlight hitting it like it belonged to someone else. I waited, nursing my tea, staring at the steam curl into the air. Then she appeared, briefly, by the counter, her face unreadable. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just ordered her drink, tucked her hair behind her ear, and left again, almost without noticing me. I wanted to follow. I wanted to ask, to reach, to say something, but I stayed. My chest ached in a dull, quiet way. I told myself it was just confusion, but my mind replayed every laugh, every brush of her fingers, every lingering glance. The next day, she was back in the shop again, a little later, eyes fixed on her cup, avoiding mine entirely. I caught a glimpse of her phone, lighting up, a name flashing on the screen didn't recognize. A child, perhaps, or an ex, someone she hadn't mentioned. My imagination ran wild. When I tried to speak, she pulled away just slightly, a subtle shift, a tiny physical distance that said everything without words. My hands trembled a little as I held my own cup. I imagined all the scenarios. She's married. She's hiding something. She's here one moment, gone the next, and I have no right to chase her. Yet I couldn't stop imagining the brush of her fingers against mine, the quiet warmth of her gaze, the nights of unspoken connection that had built between us. I didn't call. I didn't text. My messages sat half-typed and unsent, waiting for courage I didn't have. I watched from a distance as she smiled at someone else, briefly, politely, but that flicker of normalcy made my chest tighten. By the end of the week, I realized I hadn't moved. Not forward, not backward, just paused, waiting, hoping, afraid to act. I walked past the coffee shop every day, sometimes catching her reflection in the window, always alone, always just out of reach. One evening, I found myself sitting on the park bench again. My phone was open, thumb hovering over a message I didn't have the courage to send. I miss you, but I didn't. Not yet. I closed it instead, sliding the phone into my pocket. The bench across from me stayed empty. The world carried on, indifferent. And I realized I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. I found her in the kitchen that evening, the dim light from the fridge spilling over her hands as she stirred a cup of tea. The apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon and old wood. Quiet. Safe, somehow. I lingered in the doorway, unsure if I should knock, speak, or just leave. My chest ached from the week's silence, from the pause that had stretched between us. I wanted to say everything. How I'd missed her, how the empty chair at the coffee shop had felt like a part of me gone. But the words felt heavy in my throat. She glanced up, and for a moment, her expression flickered. Recognition, relief, something that made me want to cross the room in one step. But I stayed put. "You're quiet," she said, voice low. Not accusatory, just noticing. Yeah, I admitted. I didn't know if I should come. She didn't move, just tilted her head, studying me. "I wondered if you'd stop showing up," she said softly. "I wasn't sure what you wanted." I swallowed. The words almost escaped. I froze. Could I risk it? Could I let her see everything I'd been holding back? The desire, the worry, the guilt. Her hand hovered over her cup. The silence stretched. I realized how much I had feared losing this moment, this space with her, even without words. Vulnerability was heavy, sharp, but the thought of leaving without trying felt worse. "I care about you," I said finally, quiet, careful. Not the right words, maybe not enough, but true. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and then a soft exhale. "I know," she said. Nothing else. But her eyes softened, just enough that the tension between us thinned, just a little. We sat there for a while, neither speaking, both breathing a little easier. Her hand brushed the edge of mine on the counter. Not holding, not pressing, just acknowledging. I realized in that simple gesture that connection didn't need a proclamation. That sometimes silence held more than words. She smiled, small, private, human. And I smiled back, the tightness in my chest loosening just a little. "Okay," she whispered, and it sounded like both an agreement and a promise. And, for the first time in weeks, the pause between us ended. Not with a confession shouted, not with drama or flourish. Just two people acknowledging what they'd been afraid to say, leaning into the quiet, sharing the weight together. I stayed. She stayed. And it was enough. The mornings came slower now, not rushed, not weighted with unsent messages or half-formed regrets. I still went to the coffee shop on Maple Street, but the seat across from mine was no longer empty. She was there, usually with her black coffee, hands wrapped around the mug, hair catching the sunlight just right. We didn't announce anything. No grand gestures, no proclamations. Just routines that became ours. A shared bench in the park after work. A quiet nod when the barista remembered how she liked her tea. Even the little things, the way she folded her napkin, how I always let her stir first, felt like small victories, quiet affirmations that we'd made it through the pause, through the risk, through the almost loss. Sometimes we'd sit in silence for a while, watching the city breathe around us. I'd catch the corner of her smile when a pigeon landed on the railing, or when a child's laugh echoed across the street. Those moments felt ordinary, but they weren't. Not anymore. I remembered the week she pulled away, how my chest ached for the empty chair at the coffee shop. Now, the chair was always filled, though still with moments of distance, tiny, human pauses where neither of us needed to speak. One afternoon, as we walked past the old oak tree in the park, the bench where so many of our near confessions had happened, she stopped and looked at me. No words, just a glance that said everything. Patience, care, familiarity. I reached for her hand, fingers brushing hers. A small, deliberate contact, grounding us in the quiet certainty we had earned. Weeks passed. Months, maybe. Coffee cups were refilled, books exchanged, routines shared. Life carried on around us, but in the little bubble we had created, everything felt warmer, softer, grounded. The past, the waiting, the confusion, the almost moments hadn't disappeared, but they had been folded gently into the background, like napkins pressed neatly on the counter. On a Sunday morning, I arrived at 8:47 a.m. Like always. She was there, sipping tea, the steam rising between us. I sat down without a word. She nodded, small smile, and we watched the street wake up. No declarations, just presence. I realized then that love didn't need fireworks. It needed the everyday, the rituals, the small acknowledgments that someone else knew your heart, quietly, without needing to shout it. And as we sat there, the soft murmur of the city around us, I thought of all the pauses, the near misses, the nights of unsent texts and folded napkins. I leaned slightly toward her, and our shoulders touched, warm and unspoken. Only we understood the weight of those moments. Only we knew the patience, the fear, and the joy it took to arrive here. And that was enough. Quietly, perfectly enough.